She handed coffee to the man with the German shepherd right in front of the inspector. Her boss didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look angry. Just cold. Final. "You're done here, Emma." 6 years of loyalty erased in a single sentence. She didn't cry. Just untied her apron, hand shaking, and walked out. Not because she broke a rule, but because she stood up for a veteran and his service dog. What Emma didn't know was that someone filmed the whole thing, and before the cafe's morning rush was over, the ground began to shake. 4 military Humvees rolled into the lot. Out stepped a Marine colonel in full dress blues, a man who once owed his life to the very dog she had protected. And in that moment, everything changed. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Emma Sullivan wasn't the type of woman people noticed first, but she was the one they remembered longest. At 35, she managed the Homecoming Cafe tucked on the edge of downtown Oak Ridge, Virginia, just a 15-minute drive from Fort Belvoir, one of the largest marine installations in the Southeast. The town itself was like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting, oak-lined sidewalks, American flags on every third porch, and a hardware store that hadn't changed its paint color since the Reagan administration. But inside the cafe, things felt different, warmer, more human. Emma made sure of that. She didn't run the cafe like a business. She ran it like a second home, the kind of place where someone could walk in after a long day or a long deployment and feel human again. The coffee wasn't anything fancy. No espresso martinis or complicated froth art, just strong brews, hot refills, and handwritten notes stuck to the bulletin board behind the counter. But what set the Homecoming Cafe apart wasn't the coffee. It was Emma. She remembered names, birthdays, blackout dates for deployment. She knew who liked their eggs over hard and who hadn't touched coffee since they got back from Iraq. She made space for silence, especially the kind that came from veterans who carried more than just physical scars. And every Wednesday at 9:00 a.m. sharp, she hosted what had quietly become a town tradition, Heroes Hour. It started with just 3 of them. Her father-in-law, Ben Sullivan, a retired Marine Corps drill instructor, Ralph, a Vietnam vet who rarely spoke but never missed a week, and Louisa, a former Army nurse with a laugh that echoed like wind chimes. Over time, the circle grew: Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. Veterans from every era found their way to her cafe, drawn less by the menu and more by the woman who ran it. Emma would always say the same thing before starting: "This is a place to be seen, not fixed, to sit, not perform." And they'd nod, shoulders easing as they sipped coffee and swapped stories, some funny, some heavy, and some too painful to tell with words. She never spoke much about her own story, but everyone in town knew the outline. Her younger brother, Staff Sergeant Michael Sullivan, had taken his own life 3 years after returning from Afghanistan. His photograph hung on the wall above the register, not in uniform, but in jeans and a flannel, holding a mug of coffee outside the cafe's front door. It was a crisp Wednesday morning, the kind of morning where sunlight looked cooler than it felt, and steam rose gently from every cup like little ghosts. Emma was behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned back, greeting every familiar face with that same nod, quiet but warm. She had already brewed the first pot of dark roast for Heroes Hour, and was setting out the stack of ceramic mugs she saved just for the veterans. These weren't the standard white mugs they served to regular customers. These were mismatched, donated by community members, each with its own story: a Navy mug with an anchor, an Army mug with its handle shaped like a grenade, a Marine Corps mug, chipped at the rim but cherished all the same. "Morning, Emma," called old Pete, easing his arthritis-stiff body onto his usual stool at the counter. "Gonna be a good crowd today. Saw Jefferson parking his truck when I walked in." Emma smiled, sliding a mug of coffee in front of him without asking. Black, 2 sugars, just how he'd taken it since 1967. "How's the knee today?" she asked, noticing his slight wince. "Same as the weather, fair to middlin'," he replied with a wink. "My grandson's coming home next month," finished his second tour. "We'll have a welcome home party right here," Emma promised, making a mental note to order his favorite apple pie from Mabel's Bakery down the street. The bell over the door jingled softly. The regulars filed in, coffee brewed, the cafe filled with quiet chatter, laughter, and the warm hum of belonging. Emma didn't know it yet, but by the end of the day, that little corner cafe would become the center of a storm that would echo all the way to Washington. Then the door opened again, and Marcus Wells stepped in with Ranger by his side. Marcus was one of the newer faces, late 30s, ex-Marine Corps recon. The scar tissue that pulled at the left side of his face told part of his story. The prosthetic leg told another part. But it was his eyes alert, wary, constantly scanning that told the most important part. He didn't talk much, and he never stayed long. But he came. That meant something. Ranger, his German shepherd, was never more than a few inches from his heel. The dog wore a bright red vest with bold white lettering, "Service Dog, Do Not Pet." Despite his imposing size, Ranger moved with the calm precision of an animal born to work. His intelligent eyes missed nothing, constantly checking his handler and the surroundings. Emma gave Marcus a little wave. "Table by the windows open," she said, smiling. He nodded, murmured a thanks, and guided Ranger to the far corner. That spot gave Marcus a clear view of both exits and his back to the wall, the only way he could sit comfortably in public. Then the air shifted. The front door swung open with a brisk whoosh, and in walked a man in a navy blazer, neatly pressed slacks, and an expression that seemed allergic to joy. He carried a clipboard like it was a badge of honor. His name tag read, "Logan Peterson, State Health Inspector." Emma hadn't been expecting a visit. She greeted him politely. "Can I help you find something?" "An inspection," he said flatly. Unannounced, he moved through the space with surgical detachment, tapping on metal surfaces, checking labels, pulling open refrigerator doors. The veterans watched him, many instinctively straightening their postures, old habits from military inspections rising to the surface. And then Logan saw the dog. He stopped mid-step like he'd walked into a wall. "That animal," he said loudly, pointing toward Ranger, "is in violation of state health code. No animals permitted where food is served." Heads turned. Conversations went quiet. Marcus stiffened in his chair, knuckles whitening around his coffee mug. Ranger, sensing his distress, pressed closer to his leg, but remained perfectly disciplined, not making a sound. Emma stepped out from behind the counter, careful not to raise her voice. "He's a registered service dog," she said calmly. "ADA law permits his presence here." Logan frowned, scanning the room like he was looking for backup. "I don't care what vest he's wearing," he snapped. "Animals carry dander, saliva, hair. This is a food hazard. Unless you want this cafe shut down, that dog goes." Old Pete started to rise from his stool, but Emma shot him a look that gently asked him to stay seated. This was her battle. "Sir," she tried again, "the Americans with Disabilities Act specifically protects service animals. Ranger assists Mr. Wells with mobility and medical alerts. It would be against federal law to deny him entry." Logan's face hardened. "I'm not denying the man entry. I'm enforcing health code regarding the animal." From his corner, Marcus hadn't moved, but his breathing had quickened. Ranger looked up at him with concern, then back at the confrontation as if calculating a threat assessment. "Is there a problem here?" came a new voice from the doorway. Emma turned to see Meredith Carter, regional manager for the Homecoming Cafe parent company. Apparently, she'd arrived early for a routine check-in just in time to see it all. Her eyes were wide. Her tone was ice. "Ms. Sullivan," Meredith said, stepping into the cafe, designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "What's going on?" Before Emma could answer, Logan jumped in. "This establishment is in violation of health code regulations. There's an animal present in the dining area." "He's a service dog," Emma repeated, feeling a knot form in her stomach. Meredith looked from Emma to Marcus to Ranger, then to the room full of veterans watching silently, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Emma, may I speak with you?" she asked, gesturing toward the back office. "Whatever you need to say. You can say it here," Emma replied, keeping her voice steady. "I'm not asking Mr. Wells or his service dog to leave. That would violate his rights under federal law." Meredith's jaw clenched. "This isn't about rights. It's about company policy. We cannot risk a health citation." "The law is clear," Emma insisted. "Service animals are permitted. I won't discriminate against a veteran." "Emma Donnelly," Meredith said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You've just defied both a state health inspector and your regional manager. Pack your things. You're terminated." Gasps rang out. A spoon clattered to the floor. Marcus stood halfway, shocked. Ranger remained perfectly still, but alert, his eyes fixed on his handler. Emma didn't move. Not at first. Then she looked around the cafe. She looked at Marcus, at Ranger, at the small chalkboard on the wall that said, "Heroes Hour today, free coffee for vets," and she smiled, just barely. She untied her apron with trembling fingers, folded it, and placed it on the counter. Then she turned to Amber, the young barista by the espresso machine, and whispered, "Make sure Marcus gets his refill." She walked out the side door into the morning sunlight as the cafe stood frozen behind her. No one followed. But someone pressed record on their phone, and somewhere out in the ether of social media and invisible networks, a story had just been captured, a quiet act of defiance, a line drawn, a woman fired not because she broke a rule, but because she refused to break her soul. Emma sat in her truck, key in the ignition, but engine still silent. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel as the reality of what had just happened washed over her. 6 years at Homecoming Cafe. 6 years of early mornings, late nights, and building something that mattered. Gone in an instant, through the windshield. She could see the cafe's hand-painted sign swinging gently in the morning breeze. A home for the homesick. That had been her brother's idea for the tagline, scribbled on a napkin before his last deployment, before the nightmares, before the pills. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Then again, and again, she pulled it out to find a flurry of notifications. A video was spreading across local social media, Emma standing her ground, defending Marcus and Ranger, then being fired. Already, comments were pouring in, support, outrage, calls for boycotts. "Good Lord," she whispered, watching the view count climb. She hadn't noticed anyone filming. The phone rang in her hand, Amber calling from the cafe. Emma hesitated, then answered. "Emma, you need to come back." Amber's voice was hushed, urgent. "Something's happening." "I can't come back." "Amber, I've been fired." "No, you don't understand," the young barista insisted. "There are Marines here, like a lot of them, and they're asking for you." Emma frowned. "Marines? A whole bunch of them. In uniform. And there's a colonel. He looks important." Before Emma could reply, she heard it a low rumble, growing louder by the second. She looked up to see 4 military Humvees turning onto Main Street, moving in tight formation. Her heart skipped a beat as they pulled into the cafe parking lot, one after another, with military precision. "I'll call you back," she told Amber, hanging up from her truck across the street. Emma watched as men and women in marine dress blues emerged from the vehicles, at least 20 of them, standing at attention outside the cafe. Leading them was a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver at his temples, a full colonel by the insignia on his uniform, his chest heavy with commendations. Curiosity overcame caution. Emma stepped out of her truck and crossed the street, keeping a respectful distance from the formation. The colonel noticed her approach and turned, his weathered face breaking into a small, dignified smile. "Ms. Sullivan?" he asked, extending his hand. "Colonel James Harrison, Marine Corps." Emma shook his hand, puzzled. "Colonel, this is unexpected. So was the video that's currently making rounds at Fort Belvoir," he replied, nodding toward the cafe. "Mind if we have a word after I address a situation inside?" Before she could answer, the colonel turned and entered the cafe. His steps measured and purposeful, the Marines remained outside, still and silent as statues. Emma followed, drawn by a force she couldn't name. Inside, the cafe had fallen completely silent. Logan Peterson stood frozen near the pastry case, his clipboard lowered, forgotten. Meredith Carter had paled 2 shades and stepped back from the counter like it might burn her. The cafe's bell jingled once, and Colonel Harrison entered. His boots struck the floor hard, slow, echoing like a drum roll through the silence. He stopped in the center of the cafe, glancing once at Amber, who swallowed hard, then at Marcus, who had slowly stood up, posture straightening instinctively. Their eyes met. Marcus nodded quietly. The colonel returned it with something even deeper a salute. That's when Logan Peterson stammered, I didn't know he was—" The colonel didn't raise his voice. "You don't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic dignity." He turned to Emma, who had entered behind him. "Ms. Sullivan, my name is Colonel James Harrison. 6 years ago, I commanded a unit in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. That unit included your brother, Staff Sergeant Michael Sullivan." Emma's breath caught. Michael. Always Michael. "Your brother was a fine Marine," the colonel continued. "And today, I find out his sister was fired for upholding the very values he fought to protect." Meredith stepped forward, finding her voice. "Colonel, with all due respect, this is a business matter." "Is it?" The colonel cut her off, his tone measured but firm. "Because it looks remarkably like discrimination against a decorated veteran and his service animal." "A service animal, I might add, that has saved more American lives than most people in this room." He turned to Marcus. "Staff Sergeant Wells, how long have you had Ranger?" Marcus cleared his throat. 4 years, sir, since my medical retirement. And before that, he was a military working dog, sir. 2 tours in Afghanistan with Marine Special Operations Command." The colonel nodded, then addressed the room. "What some of you may not know is that 4 years ago, Ranger here was awarded the Animals in War and Peace Medal of Bravery. Not that you'd know it to look at him now. He's just doing his job, quietly, without complaint." Emma looked at Ranger with new eyes. The German shepherd sat perfectly still beside Marcus, alert but calm, his dark eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond words. "In July 2017, the colonel continued, Ranger detected an IED that saved an entire squad later that same deployment, when his handler was critically wounded in an ambush. Ranger dragged him to safety under fire, then returned to pull 2 more Marines out of danger. One of those Marines was me." A collective gasp rippled through the cafe. Logan Peterson's face had drained of color. "That dog," the colonel said, pointing to Ranger, "has earned his place in any establishment in this country, and the man with him has earned the right to be treated with respect." He turned to Meredith, who, "Now, I understand you're the regional manager." She nodded stiffly. "Then perhaps you'd like to reconsider your position on Ms. Sullivan's employment. She was following federal law. The Americans with Disabilities Act is quite clear on service animals." Meredith's lips pressed into a thin line. "Company policy cannot supersede federal law." The colonel finished for her. "I'm sure your legal department would confirm that." For a moment, the cafe hung in perfect silence. Then, from outside, one of the Marines called, "Colonel, sir, the general's on the line." Harrison nodded. "Ms. Sullivan, would you step outside with me for a moment?" Confused but curious, Emma followed him out. The Marines still stood at attention, creating an impressive sight in front of the small-town cafe. Several had moved to the Humvees, retrieving items Emma couldn't see clearly. "Ms. Sullivan," the colonel said once they were outside, "I didn't just come here because of what happened today. I came because Fort Belvoir needs someone like you. Sir, we've been trying to establish a veterans wellness initiative on base for 2 years. It's struggling. Bureaucracy, red tape, lack of connection with the veterans themselves." He gestured toward the cafe. "Meanwhile, You've created exactly what we've been trying to build. Just with coffee and instinct instead of federal funding. Emma shook her head slightly. I'm just a cafe manager, Colonel. No, he corrected gently. You're someone who understands what these men and women need, not forms and processes. Connection, dignity, belonging. From behind them, Emma heard the cafe door open. Marcus stepped out. Ranger at his side. The veteran's face was solemn, but his eyes held something Emma had never seen there before purpose. Ms. Sullivan, Marcus said, his voice rough from disuse. What you did in there? No one stood up for me like that since I got back. Emma smiled softly. It was the right thing to do. Not everyone does the right thing, the colonel observed. Which is precisely why I'd like you to consider running our Veterans Wellness Center at Fort Belvoir. We need someone who already knows how to create a safe harbor. Emma blinked, certain she'd misheard. You want me to... What? Come to Fort Belvoir this afternoon, Colonel Harrison said, handing her a business card. See the space. Meet some of the veterans. Consider it. He glanced at his watch. I have to return to base, but I've left something for the cafe to remember you by. As if on cue, 2 Marines walked out of the cafe carrying the corporate logo that had hung behind the counter. In its place, they had mounted a hand-carved wooden sign that read, Emma's Corner, where honor is served daily. Emma's eyes welled with tears. Behind her, through the cafe window, she could see Meredith Carter's stunned expression, Logan Peterson's downcast eyes, and the veterans inside, standing now, watching with quiet approval. 1,500 hours, the colonel said, checking his watch. I'll be expecting you. Fort Belvoir sprawled like a small city across the Virginia landscape, disciplined, orderly roads, flag-lined avenues, the sound of cadence calls echoing in the background. Emma had been here once before, for Michael's deployment ceremony. But now, as she drove through the main gate, visitor pass displayed on her dashboard, it felt different. Less like a fortress and more like a community with wounds that needed tending. She parked in the visitor lot outside Building 247, a modest 2-story structure tucked between the base hospital and community center. Veterans Wellness Initiative, read the sign. The paint still fresh enough to suggest newness, but the empty parking spaces hinting at underuse. Colonel Harrison met her at the entrance, now in standard khakis rather than dress blues. His handshake was firm, his manner direct but kind. Thank you for coming, Ms. Sullivan. Emma. Please, she said, finding herself standing straighter in his presence without meaning to. Emma. He nodded. Let me show you what we're working with. The colonel led her through corridors lined with motivational posters and framed military photographs. The building smelled of fresh paint and unused potential. They passed empty rooms with folding chairs stacked against walls, a small gym with equipment still in plastic wrapping, a kitchen with gleaming counters that had clearly never seen use. This facility was approved 2 years ago, Harrison explained as they walked. Funding arrived 18 months ago. We opened 6 months ago. He paused at a large room with a circle of chairs, empty except for one young private dutifully arranging pamphlets on a side table. And yet, on an average day, We see maybe 5 veterans in a community of thousands. Emma ran her fingers along a windowsill, noting the dust-free surface. It's very clinical. Precisely the problem. Harrison agreed. We've built a facility, not a sanctuary. We have programs, not community. And he gestured toward the empty chairs. We offer services, but veterans aren't coming. They continued the tour, passing a meditation room, an art therapy space, and finally arriving at a small office with a view of the parade grounds. Harrison invited her to sit. "Why me?" Emma asked, finally voicing the question that had been circling her mind since his offer. "I'm not a therapist. I don't have a degree in social work or psychology. I've never run a government program." Harrison leaned back in his chair, considering her carefully. 2 months after we opened this center, I visited your cafe incognito. Plain clothes. No indication I was military. I sat in the corner for 3 hours and watched. "I don't remember seeing you," Emma said, searching her memory. "You wouldn't. I was forgettable by design." He smiled slightly. "But I remember what I saw. Veterans who wouldn't set foot in this facility were comfortable in your cafe. Men and women who wouldn't fill out our intake forms were telling you their stories over coffee. You created a place of healing without calling it therapy. Community without mandating participation." Emma shifted in her seat, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just make coffee and listen." "Do you know what the suicide rate is among veterans?" Harrison asked, his tone shifting. 20 a day," Emma answered without hesitation. Michael's ghost lingered between them, unspoken. "We've tried everything. Hotlines, campaigns, billion-dollar programs." Harrison gestured around them. "Facilities like this, and yet the number doesn't change. But in your cafe, I saw something working, not because of fancy techniques or clinical approaches, but because you understood something fundamental. Healing happens in community, in belonging, in purpose." From down the hall came the sound of a door opening, then footsteps. A moment later, a young woman appeared in the doorway, mid-20s with close-cropped hair and a careful way of moving. A golden retriever puppy in a training vest sat obediently at her side. "Sir," she addressed the colonel, "I didn't realize you had a meeting." "Come in. Specialist Adams." Harrison waved her forward. "This is Emma Sullivan. She might be joining our team." The young woman Adams assessed Emma with wary eyes, the kind of wariness that came from having trusted and been let down too many times. "As what? As the new director of the Wellness Initiative," Harrison said calmly. Adams blinked, surprise briefly overtaking caution. "Sir." "Emma, this is Specialist Tiffany Adams, Army, 2 tours in Iraq, currently working with us as a volunteer while she trains her service dog, Bella." Emma stood and offered her hand. "Nice to meet you." "Specialist Adams." The younger woman hesitated, then shook Emma's hand. Her grip was firm, but Emma noticed the slight tremor, the way she pulled back just a fraction too quickly. The golden retriever puppy looked up at Emma with liquid brown eyes, young but already attuned to her handler's emotions. "Tiffany, if you don't mind," Harrison said, "would you share with Ms. Sullivan why you started coming here?" Tiffany shifted her weight, uncomfortable with the spotlight. "It's nothing special. "Sir, I think it is," he insisted gently. She sighed, reaching down to touch the puppy's head, drawing strength from the contact. "I saw the video of you at the cafe with the guy and his German shepherd." Her words came carefully, measured. "I haven't been to a restaurant or cafe since I came home. Too many people, too much noise, too many looks." She gestured vaguely at the left side of her face, where Emma now noticed the faint tracery of burn scars extending down her neck. "But I thought," Tiffany continued, "if there was a place like that, where someone would stand up for a vet and their dog, well, maybe I could sit in a place like that." Emma felt something shift in her chest, a tightening and expanding all at once. "You'd be welcome any time." "That's just it," Harrison interjected. "We need that sense of welcome here. This facility has everything except the one thing veterans need most, a place where they feel they belong just as they are. Not a patient, not a case number, a person." Emma looked around the sterile office, then back to Tiffany and her puppy. She thought of Marcus and Ranger, of old Pete and his stories, of all the veterans who had found their way to her cafe not for the coffee, but for what happened around it. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "But I have conditions." Harrison's eyebrows raised slightly. "I'm listening. First, no more pamphlets and posters. This place needs to feel lived in, not administered." She counted on her fingers. "Second, I bring in my own coffee setup. Real mugs, not paper cups. Third, we need comfortable furniture sofas, armchairs, things that don't look like a doctor's waiting room. Fourth, service dogs are not just welcome, but celebrated." A smile tugged at the corner of Harrison's mouth. "Anything else?" "Yes." Emma nodded firmly. "No clipboards. No intake forms for someone to just have a cup of coffee and sit. The paperwork can come later, after trust is built." Tiffany was watching her with growing interest, the wariness in her eyes giving way to something like hope. The puppy, sensing the shift in her handler's mood, wagged her tail tentatively. "Done," Harrison agreed, extending his hand. "When can you start?" "Tomorrow," Emma said, shaking his hand. "But first, I need to grab a few things from the cafe." The next morning, Emma arrived at Building 247 at 0600 hours, 2 hours before official opening, before. She'd spent the night moving essentials from her apartment, personal touches that would transform the sterile facility. In her trunk were boxes of mismatched mugs, the handwritten notebook where she'd kept track of veterans' preferences and stories, and a box of framed photographs from the cafe walls. She was surprised to find Tiffany already waiting by the entrance, Bella sitting patiently at her side. "Couldn't sleep," Tiffany explained with a small shrug. "Thought I might help." Together, they began transforming the main common area. Emma pushed the perfect rows of chairs into a more casual arrangement, creating conversation nooks rather than a classroom setup. She hung the photographs, not official military portraits, but candid shots of veterans in everyday moments, laughing, sharing coffee, living. By the time the official opening hour arrived, the space already felt different. A large coffee station dominated one corner, the industrial coffee maker Emma had purchased with her own savings gurgling cheerfully. A bulletin board replaced the information kiosk, blank except for a single note: "Who needs a ride? Who needs a listener?" beside it. Emma hung her brother's photograph, Michael in jeans and a flannel shirt, coffee mug in hand, smiling that smile that never quite reached his eyes after his first tour. At 0800 hours, Colonel Harrison arrived for the official handover. He paused in the doorway, taking in the transformation, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well, I'll be damned." "Language, Colonel," Emma teased, handing him a mug of coffee, black, 1 sugar, just how she'd noticed he took it during their meeting the day before. He accepted the mug, eyebrows raised in surprise at her memory for detail. "Any visitors yet?" As if on cue, the front door opened. Marcus Wells stepped in, Ranger at his side, looking uncertain but determined. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a button-down shirt that hung loosely on his frame. His eyes scanned the room, shoulders tense, before landing on Emma. "Heard you'd be here," he said by way of greeting. Emma smiled. "Coffee's fresh? Got your usual dark roast?" Something like relief crossed his face. Ranger, sensing the decrease in tension, relaxed slightly beside him. They made their way to a corner armchair back to the wall. Clear view of exits, the same position Marcus always chose at the cafe. Colonel Harrison watched with quiet approval. "I'll leave you to it." Director Sullivan. "Just Emma," she corrected gently. "Emma." He nodded, before heading to the door. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "You know, when I proposed this to my superiors, they thought I was crazy. Hiring a cafe manager with no formal training to run a federal program. What changed their minds?" Harrison smiled. "I showed them the video. Then I showed them our visitor logs for the past 6 months. Sometimes the proof is in the results, not the resume." With that, he departed, leaving Emma to her new domain. By noon, word had spread. 3 more veterans had found their way to the center, an older Vietnam vet who reminded Emma of Old Pete, a young female Army specialist who kept her back to the wall, and a middle-aged Navy man who didn't speak but accepted a cup of coffee with a grateful nod. Emma moved among them, not pushing conversation, just ensuring coffee was hot, space was comfortable, and presence was acknowledged. Tiffany stayed, gradually finding her voice as she helped show new arrivals around. Bella growing more confident with each introduction. That evening, as Emma was closing up, Amber from the cafe arrived with a box of pastries and a hesitant smile. "Heard about the new gig," she said, setting the box on the counter. "Brought housewarming gifts." Emma hugged her former co-worker. "How are things at homecoming?" Amber shrugged. "Different. Quieter. Meredith has been in meetings with corporate all day." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "That video hit 200,000 views. Corporate's freaking out." "Great," Emma sighed. "Just what I need more attention." "It's good attention," Amber insisted. "People are on your side. The cafe's been flooded with calls and emails supporting you. Even some national veterans groups have picked it up." Emma shook her head, uncomfortable with being the center of a controversy. "I just want to do the work." "About that," Amber said, perching on the edge of a nearby table. "I was wondering, do you need help here? I'm good with coffee, and I kind of miss the vets." Emma felt a rush of gratitude. "Can you start Friday part-time for now?" But if this keeps growing... Done. Amber grinned. Over the next 2 weeks, the Veterans Wellness Center transformed from an empty government facility to a living, breathing community hub. Word spread through veteran networks faster than any official announcement could have managed. What started as a trickle became a steady stream of visitors, some coming for scheduled activities, others just for coffee and quiet company. Emma implemented few formal programs at first, focusing instead on creating the right environment. A whiteboard near the coffee pot simply read, "Today's offerings," with a list that included coffee, conversation, quiet space, and whatever else you need. Beneath it, veterans began writing their own offerings, chess games, ride shares, book recommendations. She kept that same handwritten notebook from the cafe, adding new pages, one for every vet who walked through the door. Not clinical notes, just human ones. Jones takes tea, not coffee. Jumpy with loud noises. Loves talking about his grandkids. Rivera first tour, still adjusting, sits by the window, draws when she thinks no one's looking. Marcus became a regular, arriving each morning with Ranger, staying longer each time. By the end of the second week, he'd started helping newer veterans navigate the VA paperwork system, his quiet efficiency and first-hand experience more valuable than any official guidance. Tiffany flourished with purpose, taking charge of a service dog training corner where veterans considering a service animal could learn the basics. Bella, her golden retriever, became the center's unofficial mascot, her puppy enthusiasm breaking the ice with even the most withdrawn visitors. But not everyone was thrilled with Emma's approach. On day 15, Logan Peterson returned not in his capacity as health inspector, but as a private citizen, his manner stiff and uncomfortable as he entered the center. Emma spotted him immediately, tensing slightly. "Mr. Peterson." "Ms. Sullivan." He nodded, looking around at the bustling space. "May I have a word?" They stepped into the small office Emma rarely used, preferring to be out in the main space with the veterans. Logan remained standing, hands clasped behind his back. "I wanted to apologize," he said finally, the words clearly difficult for him. "My behavior at the cafe was unprofessional." Emma studied him carefully. "Thank you for saying that. But I also came for another reason." He hesitated, then pulled a photograph from his pocket and placed it on the desk between them. A young man in marine dress blues smiled from the frame. "My brother, Jacob." Emma's expression softened with understanding. "He served." Logan nodded, eyes fixed on the photograph. "2 tours in Iraq. Came home different. Quieter. Couldn't sleep. Standard story. I guess." His voice tightened. "He took his life 3 years ago. Pills." The parallels to Michael were too clear to miss. Emma felt a pang of recognition, of shared grief. "I'm sorry for your loss." "I didn't understand," Logan continued. "The dog thing. I didn't get it. But after the cafe, I started reading about service animals for PTSD, for veterans." He trailed off, then squared his shoulders. "Anyway, I just wanted you to know that I withdrew the citation, and I'm recommending your center for a special exemption regarding service animals." Emma blinked in surprise. "Thank you." Logan nodded once, then turned to leave. At the door, He paused. Your brother. He was a Marine, too. Yes, Emma said softly. Michael. Afghanistan. Did he... Was it the same as Jacob? Yes. Logan's shoulders slumped slightly. Does it ever get easier? Emma thought of the photograph on the wall, of coffee cups and quiet conversations, of building something from the ashes of loss. Not easier, but more purposeful. Maybe. He nodded, a moment of understanding passing between them. Your center is doing good work, Ms. Sullivan. After Logan left, Emma returned to the main room, struck by how much had changed in just 2 weeks. Veterans sat in conversation groups, some laughing over coffee, others quietly reading in corners. Ranger lay at Marcus's feet while he helped a young Marine with benefit paperwork. Tiffany was demonstrating training techniques to an interested audience, Bella performing perfectly on cue. In that moment, Emma realized they'd created something powerful, not a treatment facility, but a community. Not patients, but people finding their way back to themselves, together. The next day, Colonel Harrison returned with 3 officials in dark suits, representatives from the Department of Veterans Affairs in Washington. Emma felt her stomach tighten as they toured the facility, clipboards in hand, expressions unreadable as they observed activities, examined the space, and took meticulous notes. No intake forms, one questioned, frowning. How do you track outcomes? I track people, not outcomes, Emma replied. And they keep coming back. That's the most important metric I know. The officials exchanged glances, clearly skeptical, as they huddled with Colonel Harrison in the corner. Emma overheard fragments, unorthodox approach, lack of formal structure, credentials concern. Harrison caught her eye across the room and gave her a reassuring nod. Whatever storm was brewing, she would weather it. The work was too important to abandon over bureaucratic concerns. That evening, after everyone had gone, Emma sat alone in the quiet center, adding notes to her book. The day's tensions lingered, but so did the victories, a veteran laughing for the first time in months, another sleeping peacefully on the sofa after weeks of insomnia, Ranger allowing a nervous new visitor to pat his head in a rare moment of relaxed protocol. She was so absorbed in her notes that she didn't hear the door open. It wasn't until a shadow fell across her page that she looked up to find Marcus standing there, Ranger at his side. Forgot my jacket, he explained, gesturing to a chair where his denim jacket hung. Emma nodded, expecting him to take it and leave. Instead, he lingered, shifting his weight from his good leg to his prosthetic and back again. Something on your mind, she prompted gently. Marcus cleared his throat. Those suits today, government types, they giving you trouble? Nothing I can't handle, she assured him. He nodded, then surprised her by sitting down across from her. In the 3 weeks she'd known him, he'd never initiated a conversation. You know, before Ranger, he began, his voice rough with disuse. I didn't leave my apartment for 8 months. Not for food, not for medical appointments, nothing. Emma set down her pen, giving him her full attention. The nightmares were bad, flashbacks worse. Couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't half the time. His hand dropped to Ranger's head, fingers threading through the German shepherd's fur. My VA counselor suggested a service dog. I thought it was stupid. Honestly, how's a dog going to fix what's broken in my head? Ranger looked up at his handler, dark eyes full of understanding beyond words. First night I had him, I woke up screaming. Instead of running away, he just stayed, put his weight on me, breathing steady until mine matched his. Marcus's voice grew quieter. That was the first night I slept more than 2 hours straight in almost a year. Emma felt the weight of his trust, this sharing of his story. He's an extraordinary dog. He's why I'm alive, Marcus said simply. And that cafe, your cafe, was the first public place I could go with him where I didn't feel wrong, different, where nobody stared or asked questions I couldn't answer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, sliding it across the table to her. Thought you should know what you're really doing here. Emma unfolded the paper, a printed email with Veterans Affairs letterhead. A survey of program effectiveness across Virginia facilities. At the bottom, a simple statistic. Fort Belvoir Wellness Initiative, 400% increase in veteran participation. Highest satisfaction ratings in region, 98% return rate. She looked up, surprised. Where did you get this? A hint of a smile touched Marcus's lips. Got friends who still work in intelligence. Just thought you should know those suits might not understand what you're building. But the numbers don't lie. He stood, retrieving his jacket. See you tomorrow. Emma. As he and Ranger walked out, Emma refolded the paper, tucking it into her notebook. The official validation was nice, but it wasn't why she did this work. She did it for Michael, for Marcus, for Tiffany, for all the broken pieces that might never fit back together perfectly, but could still make something beautiful when placed side by side. 3 months after Emma Sullivan took over the Veterans Wellness Center, Fort Belvoir's commanding general requested a formal inspection. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, its bureaucratic language masking what Emma immediately recognized as a critical juncture. Comprehensive program evaluation to assess methodology, outcomes, and alignment with departmental objectives. They're trying to decide if we're worth keeping. She translated for Amber, who had officially joined the staff full-time after Homecoming Cafe experienced a sharp decline in veteran customers. Can they shut us down? Amber asked. Concern etched across her face as she refilled the coffee urns. Emma sighed, running a hand through her hair. It's a pilot program with temporary funding. If they don't like what they see... She let the sentence hang unfinished. Word spread quickly among the regulars. By afternoon, Marcus had organized an impromptu meeting in the main room. Veterans gathering in a tight circle, their faces serious. Emma watched from her office doorway as Marcus, who barely spoke when he first started coming, addressed the group with quiet authority. This place matters, he told them, Ranger sitting attentively at his side. For some of us, it's the difference between isolation and connection. We need to make sure they understand that. The evaluation was scheduled for Friday, giving Emma 3 days to prepare. She resisted the urge to dress up the center, to make it something it wasn't. Instead, she focused on documenting what they had already built, the steady increase in attendance, the informal support networks that had formed, the gradual reintegration of veterans into community activities. Thursday evening, as Emma was finishing paperwork, Colonel Harrison stopped by. He looked more formal than usual, his uniform pressed to perfection. "Big day tomorrow," he observed, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "Is it that bad?" Emma asked, searching his face for clues. "The Deputy Secretary of Veterans Affairs is flying in from Washington," Harrison replied carefully. "This isn't just a local evaluation anymore. The program has attracted national attention." Emma's stomach tightened. "Because of the video, partly, but also because your approach is unorthodox. No clinical staff, no formal therapy sessions, no standardized assessments." He took a sip of coffee. "Some people in Washington see that as innovative. Others see it as undisciplined. And you, Colonel, what do you see?" His expression softened slightly. "I see results where others saw only problems. But I'm not the one you need to convince tomorrow." After he left, Emma stayed late, walking through the space that had transformed so dramatically in 3 months. What had once been sterile and institutional now felt lived in, almost sacred. Veterans' artwork hung on walls. Bookshelves overflowed with dog-eared paperbacks, swapped and shared among visitors. The bulletin board bristled with notes, offers of help, requests for rides, recommendations for VA-friendly landlords and employers. In one corner, a memorial wall had grown organically photographs of fallen friends, battle buddies, family members lost to war or its aftermath. Michael's picture held a place of honor, surrounded by others who had lost their fight after coming home. Emma touched her brother's photograph gently. "I hope I'm doing right by you," she whispered. Friday morning dawned clear and warm, Virginia summer asserting itself with gentle humidity. Emma arrived at 0500 hours, 2 hours before the center's official opening, to find a surprise waiting. At least 20 veterans stood outside the entrance, some in military caps or vests identifying their service, others in civilian clothes that couldn't quite hide their military bearing. Marcus stepped forward as she approached, Ranger perfectly poised beside him. "Thought you might want some company today." Emma felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You didn't have to come so early. Figured they should see this place as it really is," said Tiffany, now standing confidently with Bella, her golden retriever, fully trained and wearing an official service vest. Full of people who need it. By 0900 hours, the center was operating at full capacity. Coffee flowed freely. Veterans gathered in conversation groups. A yoga class for those with physical injuries took place in one corner, while a job skills workshop ran in another, everything happening organically, with minimal direction but maximum participation. At precisely 1000 hours, the evaluation team arrived 5 people in total, led by a stern-looking woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and a gaze that missed nothing. Colonel Harrison made the introductions. Deputy Secretary Eleanor Matthews, Department of Veterans Affairs, Dr. James Chen, Director of Mental Health Services, Major General Phillips, Pentagon Liaison, Dr. Rodriguez, Program Assessment, and Mr. Whitaker, Budget Office. Emma shook each hand firmly, fighting the fluttering in her stomach. "Welcome to Fort Belvoir Veterans Wellness Center. We're honored to have you visit." Deputy Secretary Matthews glanced around, taking in the bustling activity. "I understand you've implemented some unconventional approaches here, Ms. Sullivan." "I prefer to think of them as human-centered, ma'am," Emma replied. Would you like a tour for the next hour? Emma guided the group through the center, explaining the philosophy behind each area. The coffee station. Connection starts with something shared. The comfortable seating arranged to give choices between social interaction and quiet reflection. The service dog training corner, where Tiffany now worked with 3 veterans and their dogs in training. Dr. Chen frowned at the lack of private counseling offices. Where do you conduct therapy sessions? We don't formally, Emma explained. Licensed therapists from the VA hospital visit twice weekly for anyone who wants to schedule time. But we've found that many veterans who won't attend traditional therapy will engage in peer support here. And how do you measure outcomes without standardized assessments? Dr. Rodriguez asked, clipboard in hand. Before Emma could answer, an older veteran stepped forward. Walter, Vietnam era, former Army medic who'd started coming in the second week. Ma'am, he addressed Dr. Rodriguez respectfully but firmly. Before this place opened, I hadn't left my house except for VA appointments in 2 years. Now I'm here 3 days a week, volunteering with the younger vets, teaching them to play chess. He gestured to a table where a matched set of ivory chess pieces gleamed. That's your outcome, me, being a person again instead of just a patient. Dr. Rodriguez blinked, clearly not expecting the interruption. The tour continued, the officials asking increasingly detailed questions about funding allocation, staff qualifications, and protocol compliance. Emma answered honestly, not trying to disguise the center's departure from standard VA procedures. When they reached the memorial wall, Deputy Secretary Matthews paused, studying the photographs. Your brother, she asked, noting the resemblance between Emma and Michael. Yes, ma'am. Staff Sergeant Michael Sullivan. He took his life 3 years after returning from Afghanistan. Matthews nodded, a flicker of genuine empathy crossing her face. I'm sorry for your loss. The group moved on to the small office Emma rarely used, preparing for the formal assessment interview. As they walked, a commotion near the entrance caught their attention. A young man had entered early 20s, Marine haircut grown out slightly, his movements jerky and agitated. He scanned the room with wide, panicked eyes. Emma immediately recognized the signs of someone in crisis. She started toward him, but Marcus was already there, Ranger at his side. Hey, brother, Marcus said quietly, positioning himself in the young man's line of sight but keeping a respectful distance. First time here? The young man nodded jerkily. Someone said, you guys might... He trailed off, his breathing rapid and shallow. It's okay, Marcus assured him. No rush. Why don't you sit down, get some coffee? The evaluation team watched as Marcus guided the newcomer to a quiet corner, Ranger moving to create a gentle barrier between the young man and the rest of the room. Within minutes, the veteran's breathing had slowed, his posture becoming less rigid as he focused on petting Ranger. Deputy Secretary Matthews turned to Emma. Does this happen often, more than you'd think? Emma replied honestly. Veterans in crisis tend to seek out other veterans. Having a space where they feel safe to do that is crucial. And you have no clinical staff on hand for these situations. We have a direct line to the VA crisis team. But often, what they need first isn't clinical intervention. It's human connection and immediate safety. Back in Emma's office, the formal questioning began in earnest. The team had clearly done their homework, citing statistics, questioning methodologies, probing for weaknesses in the program structure. Emma held her ground, neither defensive nor apologetic about her approach. "The truth is," she said finally, after a particularly pointed question about her qualifications, "I'm not trying to replace traditional VA services. I'm creating a bridge to them. Many veterans won't walk through the door of a mental health clinic, but they'll come here for coffee. Once they're here, once they trust us, we can connect them to the clinical services they need." Major General Phillips, who had been mostly silent during the evaluation, leaned forward. "Ms. Sullivan, in your view, what is the single most important factor in veteran reintegration and wellness?" Emma considered the question carefully. "Belonging," she said finally. "Not just being tolerated or accommodated, but truly belonging somewhere, having purpose, mattering to others." The general nodded thoughtfully. "And how do you create that here?" "By remembering that before they were veterans, before they were service members, they were people with interests, skills, humor, opinions. We focus on the person, not just the service record or the diagnosis." The questioning continued for another hour, drilling into budgets, metrics, and procedural compliance. By the time they concluded, Emma felt drained but resolute. She had told the truth. The center's work spoke for itself. As the evaluation team prepared to leave, Deputy Secretary Matthews held back, motioning for Emma to join her for a private word. "Ms. Sullivan," she began, her tone measured. "I've visited 17 veteran facilities this month, most with larger budgets, more staff, and extensive clinical programming." Emma braced herself for criticism. "None of them had what I saw here today." Emma blinked, surprised by the shift in tone. "I'm going to be frank with you," Matthews continued. "Your approach concerns many of my colleagues. It doesn't fit neatly into our existing frameworks for veteran care. It's difficult to quantify, to standardize, to replicate." "Yes, ma'am. I understand." "But," Matthews held up a hand, "it's also the first facility I've seen where veterans were rushing to get in rather than counting the minutes until they could leave." She reached into her briefcase and extracted a folder. "This is the preliminary report I'll be filing. I thought you might want to see it before it becomes official." Emma accepted the folder with steady hands and opened it. The first page contained a simple recommendation: "Extend pilot program for minimum 2 years. Consider for national model expansion." She looked up, stunned. "Ma'am." "Sometimes the most effective solutions don't come from within the system," Matthews said with a small smile. "Your brother would be proud, Ms. Sullivan." As the evaluation team departed, the center's regular visitors gathered, tension evident in their postures as they awaited news. Emma stepped into their midst, clutching the folder to her chest. "Well," Marcus prompted, Ranger alert at his side. Emma broke into a wide smile. "We're staying, and apparently, we're expanding." A cheer erupted, veterans clapping each other on the back, relief and triumph mingling in their faces. In that moment, surrounded by the community they had built together, Emma felt Michael's presence more strongly than she had in years, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a foundation, the first stone in something that would outlast them all. That evening, after everyone had gone, Emma added a new photograph to the memorial wall, not of someone lost, but of the center itself, filled with veterans, dogs, coffee cups, and conversation. Above it, she pinned a small handwritten note. Healing happens in community. Success brought challenges Emma hadn't anticipated. As word of the Veterans Wellness Center spread, so did scrutiny. Local media coverage turned into regional interest, which attracted national attention. A profile in the Washington Post praised the revolutionary approach to veteran care, while a veterans advocacy magazine dubbed Emma the accidental therapist changing how we think about PTSD. The attention made Emma deeply uncomfortable. "I'm not the story," she insisted to Colonel Harrison after declining her third interview request in a week. "The veterans are. The community they've built is." But as fall settled over Virginia, painting Fort Belvoir in russet and gold, a different kind of challenge emerged. Meredith Carter, the regional manager who had fired Emma from Homecoming Cafe, had apparently not forgotten the incident that had launched Emma's new career. It began with a letter to the editor in the Oak Ridge Gazette, questioning the wisdom of placing untrained civilians in charge of sensitive veteran mental health programs. The letter wasn't signed by Meredith directly, but by a concerned family member of veterans. A week later, a local news station ran a segment titled "Veterans Care Professionals or Amateurs," featuring an interview with a shadowed figure identified only as former employer of Emma Sullivan. The voice was disguised, but the accusations were pointed. Emma had a history of disregarding established protocols and putting personal feelings above professional standards. Emma tried to ignore the criticism, focusing instead on the center's growing programs. They had expanded to include weekend hours, family support groups, and a job placement partnership with local businesses. But the negative attention began to take a toll, especially when it seeped into social media discussions where anonymous accounts questioned Emma's qualifications and motives. "It's just noise," Marcus assured her one morning as they watched a small crowd of protesters gather outside the center's entrance. 6 people with hand-lettered signs, "Veterans deserve professional care, and feelings aren't therapy." Emma sighed, rubbing her temples where a headache had taken up residence. "It's distracting from the work." "Ignore 'em," advised Walter, the Vietnam veteran, as he set up the chessboard for his weekly lessons. "I've been called worse than an amateur by better people than them." Emma tried to take their advice. But the situation escalated when a formal complaint was filed with the Department of Veterans Affairs, alleging mismanagement of federal funds and questioning the center's compliance with treatment protocols. The complaint triggered an automatic review, bringing inspectors back to Fort Belvoir barely a month after Deputy Secretary Matthews' positive evaluation. Colonel Harrison called Emma into his office on base, his expression grave. "I've been directed to place you on administrative leave during the investigation," he said, sliding a formal letter across his desk. Emma stared at the paper, feeling as though the floor had dropped from beneath her. "They can't just shut down the center. Veterans depend on it." "The center will remain open," Harrison clarified, "but under temporary management from the VA regional office, standard procedure during a formal investigation." "Who filed the complaint?" Emma asked, though she already suspected. Harrison hesitated. "It's confidential during investigation, but—" He lowered his voice. "The filing came from someone associated with Homestead Hospitality Group, the parent company of Homecoming Cafe, Meredith Carter." "This is personal," Emma realized aloud. She's still angry about the incident with Marcus and Ranger. Perhaps, Harrison agreed carefully. But the investigation will focus on the merit of the claims, not the motivation behind them. Emma left the colonel's office with the administrative leave letter burning a hole in her bag. She couldn't bring herself to go directly to the center, to tell the veterans, her friends, that she had been sidelined. Instead, she drove to the small park near her apartment, seeking space to think. She sat on a bench overlooking a duck pond, watching families feed bread to eager mallards, children laughing as they scattered crumbs, normal life continuing while hers had just been upended. Again, her phone buzzed with messages from Amber, from Tiffany, from Marcus, all asking where she was, what was happening. She couldn't bring herself to answer yet. As the afternoon light began to soften, Emma finally gathered her courage and drove to the center. She would face this head-on, explain the situation to everyone, assure them that the center would continue its mission even in her absence. But as she pulled into the parking lot, she saw commotion at the entrance. An ambulance was parked with lights flashing. Paramedics wheeled a stretcher toward the open doors. With a jolt of alarm, Emma recognized Marcus's denim jacket, his still form on the gurney, Ranger being held back by Tiffany as he whined and strained toward his handler. Emma leapt from her car, running toward them. "What happened?" Tiffany turned, relief washing over her face at the sight of Emma. "Seizure. A bad one. His medication." "Ms. Sullivan," interrupted an unfamiliar voice. A woman in a crisp pantsuit stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "I'm Deborah Wilson, interim director from the VA regional office. I must ask you to leave the premises immediately. You're on administrative leave." Emma ignored her, moving toward Marcus as the paramedics prepared to load him into the ambulance. "Has he had his emergency medication, the one for cluster seizures?" "We followed protocol and called 911. Wilson replied stiffly. "That's not what I asked." Emma pressed. "He carries an emergency kit in his left jacket pocket. It needs to be administered within 20 minutes of the first seizure." Wilson stepped between Emma and the stretcher. "Miss Sullivan, the situation is under control. Please respect the administrative leave order." Emma looked past her to the paramedics. "Check his left pocket. Red case. The medication needs to be administered immediately, or the seizures will continue." One of the paramedics hesitated, then quickly checked the pocket, pulling out a small red case. "She's right. Got it." As they administered the medication, Emma felt a hand on her arm. Wilson, her expression now thunderous. "Ms. Sullivan, you are interfering with official VA procedures. This incident will be added to the investigation." "Investigation be damned," Emma shot back. "That man needed his medication." "And he would have received appropriate care at the hospital," Wilson insisted. "By creating confusion in the chain of command, you've potentially compromised—" "Oh, shut up about chains of command," interrupted an elderly voice. Walter had emerged from the center, several other veterans behind him. "That boy would have been seizing for another 20 minutes while your procedures caught up. Emma knew what he needed because she knows us. All of us." Wilson's face reddened. "This is precisely the problem with Ms. Sullivan's approach. Personal familiarity is not a substitute for medical protocol." By now, Marcus was beginning to stabilize, the medication taking effect. Ranger had calmed somewhat, though he remained focused intently on his handler. The paramedics conferred briefly, then announced they would still transport Marcus to the hospital for observation. "I'm going with him," Emma stated firmly. "That would be inappropriate given your current status." Wilson objected. Emma turned to face her directly. "Listen carefully. That man is my friend. He has no family in the area. His service dog is his primary support. And right now, Ranger needs someone he trusts to help him stay calm so he can help Marcus. So either I go with them, or you'll have a very distressed service dog potentially interfering with medical care." Wilson hesitated, clearly calculating the optics of the situation veterans gathering, watching the confrontation, paramedics waiting for a decision. "Fine," she relented, "but this will be noted in my report." "Note whatever you want," Emma replied, already moving toward the ambulance, gesturing for Ranger to follow. "Just don't get in the way of these veterans getting the support they need." As Emma climbed into the ambulance with Ranger, she caught sight of the gathered veterans watching with concerned faces. Walter gave her a small nod. Tiffany raised a hand in solidarity. Even in crisis, even pushed aside by bureaucracy, the community they had built stood firm. The ambulance doors closed, and Emma took Marcus's hand. Ranger pressing against her leg, both of them keeping vigil as the sirens wailed a path through the gathering dusk. The fluorescent lights of Virginia Regional Hospital cast everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow. Emma sat in the waiting room, Ranger's head heavy on her knee, both of them watching the clock tick past midnight. Marcus had been stabilized, the doctors confirming what Emma already knew: his emergency medication had prevented a potentially dangerous prolonged seizure. They wanted to keep him overnight for observation, standard protocol for his condition. A young nurse with kind eyes approached, coffee in hand. "Thought you might need this?" she offered, passing the paper cup to Emma. "Your friend is resting. Doctor says he's doing well." Emma accepted the coffee gratefully. "Can I see him?" "Family only, during non-visiting hours," the nurse began apologetically, then glanced at Ranger. "But since his service dog needs to stay with him, and you're handling the dog—" She gave a conspiratorial smile. 5 minutes, room 412. Emma found Marcus awake, propped up against pillows, looking exhausted but alert. His face brightened slightly when Ranger rushed to his bedside, nosing his hand with worried attention. "Hey, buddy," Marcus murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. "I'm okay." "You scared us," Emma said, taking the chair beside the bed. Marcus's expression turned apologetic. "Forgot my regular meds this morning. Been distracted with everything going on." He studied her face. "Heard they put you on leave. That why you weren't at the center?" Emma nodded, the guilt she'd been carrying all evening washing over her. "If I'd been there." "Don't." Marcus cut her off firmly. "This wasn't your fault. I've had seizures since the IED. Part of life now." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the only sound the rhythmic beeping of monitors and Ranger's contented sighs as Marcus continued petting him. "They're trying to shut us down, aren't they?" Marcus finally asked. "Not the center." "Just me," Emma clarified. "Someone filed a formal complaint, questions about my qualifications, management decisions." "Carter," Marcus guessed, his jaw tightening. "From the cafe." Emma shrugged. "Can't confirm it officially, but yeah, almost certainly." "Why can't she let it go?" "It's been months." Some people need someone to blame when their worldview gets challenged, Emma suggested. I made her look bad in front of that health inspector, embarrassed her company. For some people, that's unforgivable. The nurse appeared in the doorway, tapping her watch gently. Emma stood, giving Ranger a final pat. "You'll stay with him?" she asked, nodding toward Marcus. "Wouldn't dream of separating them," the nurse assured her. "Hospital policy accommodates service animals. Even got a special bed for him." She pointed to a cushioned mat beside Marcus's bed. Emma turned to leave, but Marcus caught her hand, his grip surprisingly strong for someone who'd just suffered a seizure. "Emma," he said, his voice low and serious, "they can't stop what you started, even if they keep you away. What you built is bigger than one person now." She squeezed his hand in return, throat too tight for words, and slipped out into the corridor. Dawn found Emma on her apartment balcony, watching the sun rise over Oak Ridge, a fresh cup of coffee warming her hands. She hadn't slept, her mind racing with contingency plans, arguments for her defense, worries for the veterans who depended on the center on her. Her phone rang, displaying Colonel Harrison's number. She answered wearily. "Good morning, Colonel." "Emma," his voice was carefully neutral. "There's been a development. I need you to come to my office. 0900 hours. Another complaint. Just be there," he said, then added, more gently, "And Emma, don't give up yet." The cryptic message left her unsettled as she showered and dressed, choosing a simple blouse and slacks, professional but not formal. Whatever new accusation awaited, she would face it with dignity. Fort Belvoir seemed oddly quiet as she drove through the gate, showing her still valid ID to the guard who waved her through with a respectful nod. Colonel Harrison's office was located in the administration building, a stately brick structure dating back to the 1940s. His assistant, a sharp-eyed sergeant, escorted her immediately into the inner office. Harrison wasn't alone. Deputy Secretary Matthews from the VA sat in one of the visitor chairs, her silver hair impeccably styled, her expression unreadable. Beside her sat a man Emma didn't recognize, late 50s, distinguished gray at his temples, wearing an expensive suit with a Department of Defense pin on his lapel. Emma's stomach tightened. This was more serious than she'd imagined. "Ms. Sullivan," Harrison began formally, "thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." She lowered herself into the remaining chair, back straight, hands folded in her lap to keep them from trembling. "You know Deputy Secretary Matthews?" Harrison continued. "And this is Under Secretary William Keller, Department of Defense, Office of Warrior Care." The man extended his hand, which Emma shook automatically, mind racing to understand why such a high-ranking official would be involved in her case. "Ms. Sullivan," Keller began, his voice surprisingly warm. "I've heard a great deal about you and your work at the Wellness Center." "Sir," she acknowledged, bracing for whatever came next. To her surprise, he smiled, all of it impressive. "Which is why this situation is particularly troubling." Emma glanced between the three officials, confused by the unexpected praise. "I'm afraid I don't understand." Deputy Secretary Matthews opened a folder on her lap. "Yesterday afternoon, following your incident at the center, we received this." She extracted an envelope bearing official Department of Defense letterhead and passed it to Emma, with careful fingers. Emma opened it and withdrew a single sheet of paper. Her eyes widened as she read the first line. "You are hereby nominated for the National Civilian Commendation for Distinguished Service to Veterans." She looked up, stunned. There must be some mistake. "No mistake," Keller assured her. "Your nomination was submitted 3 weeks ago, well before the current controversy. The timing is politically awkward, shall we say, but the nomination stands on its merits. But the complaint, the investigation," Matthews sighed, "still ongoing. I'm afraid. Bureaucracy moves at its own pace, even when contradicting itself." She leaned forward. "But this nomination changes the dynamics considerably. The Department of Defense doesn't typically honor people it's simultaneously investigating for mismanagement." Colonel Harrison cleared his throat. "There's more, Emma." Keller nodded, continuing where Matthews left off. "The commendation comes with an invitation to speak at the National Veterans Advocacy Conference in Washington next month. It's a significant platform policymakers, VA leadership, veteran service organizations from across the country." Emma's mind struggled to reconcile these contradictions: administrative leave and a national honor, investigation and invitation. "I don't understand what this means for the center, for my position." "That's what we need to discuss," Harrison said, glancing at his colleagues before continuing. "Officially, the investigation must proceed. But given this development, we have some flexibility in how we handle your administrative leave." Matthews took over. "We're proposing a modified arrangement. You would remain technically on leave from direct management of the center, but would be temporarily reassigned as a program consultant to prepare for the conference presentation. This would allow you limited access to the center to gather data and testimonials, while respecting the formal investigation process." "A compromise," Keller added. "Imperfect, but workable." Emma considered the proposal, relief mingling with lingering frustration. "And the veterans who's running the center in the meantime?" "Ms. Wilson remains the interim director," Matthews confirmed. "But we've instructed her to maintain all existing programs and approaches. No substantive changes during the investigation period." It wasn't ideal, but it was better than complete separation. Emma nodded slowly. "I accept the compromise. Thank you." As the meeting concluded, and Emma prepared to leave, Keller held back, asking for a private word. When the others had stepped out, he closed the door and fixed Emma with a penetrating gaze. "Ms. Sullivan, there's something you should know that I couldn't say in front of the others." His voice dropped. "I served with your brother in Afghanistan, not in his unit, but I visited forward operating bases regularly as part of command assessment." Emma felt her chest tighten. "You knew Michael?" "Not well," Keller admitted, "but I remember him. Sharp, respected by his men. The kind of NCO that makes the difference between mission success and failure." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "When I heard about his suicide, it hit hard. Another good Marine lost after surviving the war." Emma swallowed against the knot in her throat. "Thank you for telling me. I'm not sharing this out of sentimentality," Keller continued. "I want you to understand that your work at the center, it matters to people like me. People who've seen too many Michael Sullivans slip through the cracks of a system that was supposed to catch them. He handed her a business card with his direct number handwritten on the back. Whatever happens with this investigation, don't stop what you're doing. The military to civilian transition is where we're losing too many good people. Your approach informal, human, community-based. It's filling a gap the system hasn't figured out how to address. As Emma drove back to her apartment, the contradictions of the day swirled in her mind. The nomination letter felt heavy in her bag, both vindication and complication. Her phone buzzed with a text from the hospital Marcus had been discharged, was resting at home with Ranger. Another text followed from Tiffany. Veterans meeting at Walter's house tonight, 7 p.m. Important. By the time Emma arrived at Walter's modest ranch house in a quiet Oak Ridge suburb, the living room was already packed. At least 20 veterans from the center had gathered, their faces a mix of concern and determination. Marcus sat in an armchair by the fireplace, looking pale but resolute. Ranger at his feet. Tiffany and Amber had claimed spots on the floor, making room for others on the limited seating. Walter, playing host with gruff efficiency, pressed a cup of coffee into Emma's hands as she entered. "About time you showed up. These youngsters have been plotting a revolution without proper supervision." "Revolution?" Emma asked, raising an eyebrow. Marcus gestured for her to take the seat they'd saved beside him. "Not exactly. More like a counter-strike." He nodded to Tiffany, who opened a laptop on the coffee table. "We've been gathering evidence," Tiffany explained, turning the screen so Emma could see. "About the impact of the center, about your leadership, personal testimonials, outcome data, everything we could think of to fight the investigation." Emma was touched by their efforts but shook her head sadly. "I appreciate this more than you know, but bureaucratic investigations follow their own rules. Testimonials won't." "It's not just for the investigation," interrupted a new voice. Logan Peterson, the health inspector who had started this whole journey, stepped forward from the corner where he'd been quietly observing. "It's for the conference presentation. And for this," he placed a USB drive on the table. "Security camera footage from Homecoming Cafe. The day you were fired." Emma stared at the drive. "How did you get that?" "Let's just say Amber isn't the only former employee with access to their systems," Logan replied with a small smile. "The point is, we have the unedited version. Shows everything that happened before the Marines arrived, including some comments Ms. Carter made when she thought no one was recording." "Comments?" Emma asked. "About veterans," Marcus explained, his expression darkening. "About how she lost her husband in a car accident caused by a drunk veteran. How she's hated all of us ever since. Called us broken time bombs waiting to explode." Emma closed her eyes briefly, understanding washing over her. "That explains her vendetta. It wasn't just about me embarrassing her. It was personal." "Exactly," Tiffany said. "And we think the public should know that the complaint against you comes from someone with a documented bias against veterans." "We're not looking to destroy her," Walter clarified, his voice gentler than his words. "Lord knows grief makes people do and say things they shouldn't. But we can't let her grief become policy that hurts others." The room fell silent as Emma considered the implications. Using the footage felt uncomfortably close to the same tactics being used against her personal attacks rather than focusing on the work itself. "I don't want to fight this way," she said finally. "Not with exposés or accusations. If we win by those methods, we become what we're fighting against." Disappointment flickered across several faces, but Marcus nodded slowly in understanding. "Then what do we do?" Emma reached into her bag and pulled out the nomination letter. This arrived today, along with an invitation to speak at the National Veterans Advocacy Conference next month. She passed the letter around, watching as surprise and pride replaced frustration on the veterans' faces. "This is our platform," she continued. "Not an attack on Meredith Carter or anyone else. We'll show what the center has accomplished. Let the work speak for itself." "And in the meantime," Amber asked, "Wilson's running the center like a hospital ward. Sign-in sheets, scheduled activities, no more drop-ins or informal gatherings." "I've been given limited access as a program consultant," Emma explained. "I can gather information, talk with veterans, document outcomes, not manage directly, but be present." Walter snorted. "Bureaucratic nonsense. But I suppose it's better than nothing." "It's enough," Emma insisted, a plan forming in her mind. "Because what we need now isn't management. It's stories. Your stories."
About what the center means, how it's different from traditional VA services, what would be lost if our approach was replaced with standard clinical protocols. She looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. "The conference isn't just about me receiving an award. It's about showing policymakers a new way forward. And for that, I need your voices." The energy in the room shifted, skepticism giving way to purpose. Tiffany opened a new document on her laptop, ready to coordinate. Marcus straightened in his chair. Ranger, sensing his handler's renewed focus and sitting at attention. "Tell me," Emma said simply. "Tell me your stories. Not just the polished versions for official reports, the real ones, the messy, complicated truth about coming home, about finding the center, about what happens in that space that doesn't happen anywhere else." And one by one, they began to speak. Stories of isolation broken, of small victories celebrated, of darkest moments when the center had been the only place they could bear to exist. Walter described chess games that had given him purpose after decades of nightmares. A young Army veteran named Jessica spoke of bringing her children to Family Day, watching them play with other military kids who understood without explanation why loud noises made Mommy jump. Marcus, typically so reserved, shared how the center had been the first place he'd actually laughed, since returning from Afghanistan. It wasn't even something funny, he recalled. Just old Pete dropping his coffee and cursing like a sailor. But it was real, and I remembered I was still human. As the stories flowed, Emma recorded them. Each one a thread in the tapestry they were weaving together, a pattern larger and more beautiful than any single experience. By the time the gathering dispersed well past midnight, she had pages of notes and a clarity of purpose that transcended the investigation, the nomination, even the center itself. This wasn't just about defending a program or methodology. It was about preserving a sacred space where wounded warriors could become whole people again, not through protocols or treatments, but through the simple, profound miracle of belonging. As she drove home under a canopy of stars, Emma felt Michael's presence more strongly than she had in years, not as grief or guilt, but as inspiration. "We're finishing what you couldn't,"
she whispered to the night. "We're bringing them all the way home." The National Veterans Advocacy Conference occupied the grand ballroom of the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C., a historic venue that had hosted presidents and dignitaries since the Civil War. Its ornate chandeliers cast a warm glow over round tables draped in cream linen, each adorned with small arrangements of red, white, and blue flowers. At the far end, a stage with a polished podium bore the conference logo, a flag and a helping hand intertwined. Emma stood at the back of the empty ballroom, having arrived hours before the evening ceremony. The space felt impossibly vast, intimidatingly formal, nothing like the comfortable, lived-in atmosphere of the Veterans Wellness Center. Her simple navy dress and modest pearl earrings had seemed appropriate when she'd packed, but now she questioned every choice. "Reconnoitering the battlefield," came a familiar voice behind her. She turned to find Marcus approaching, Ranger at his side. The transformation in his appearance startled her. Gone was the usual denim and flannel, replaced by a perfectly pressed dress uniform, medals gleaming on his chest, the Marine Corps insignia shining on his collar. Even Ranger wore a formal service vest, red with gold trim, his coat brushed to glossy perfection. "Staff Sergeant Wells," Emma said, smiling at the formal picture they presented. "You clean up remarkably well." "The Corps assigned me as your official escort," he explained, a hint of pride in his voice. "When they heard about my connection to the center, they figured it made sense. Plus, Ranger's something of a celebrity in certain circles." Emma knelt to greet the German Shepherd, who maintained his professional demeanor but permitted a brief ear scratch. "You both look very distinguished." "Can't say the same for the rest of our crew," Marcus said with a small grin. "Walter refused to wear anything but his Vietnam veteran's cap. Says if they wanted him in uniform, they should have made him feel welcome when he came home in '71. He's here." Emma hadn't expected her veterans to make the trip to Washington. Marcus nodded. 14 of us. Actually, took up a collection, rented a van. Tiffany's uncle works for Amtrak. Got discounts for the rest. We're the unofficial Fort Belvoir delegation. Emotion tightened Emma's throat. These veterans, many living on fixed incomes or disability payments, had pooled resources to support her on this night of recognition. "You didn't have to do that?" "Yes, we did," Marcus said simply. "Family shows up." As they walked the perimeter of the ballroom, Emma rehearsed key points from her speech. The conference organizers had allocated her 5 minutes of brief acknowledgement to accompany the civilian commendation. But in those 5 minutes, she intended to convey the essence of what made the Veterans Wellness Center different, what made it necessary. "Nervous?" Marcus asked as they circled back to the entrance. "Terrified," Emma admitted. "Give me a room full of veterans any day over a ballroom of officials and cameras. Just talk to us," he suggested. "Forget the brass and the politicians. Find our faces in the crowd and speak to us. We already know what you're going to say because we've lived it." The advice was simple but profound. Emma nodded gratefully as they parted ways, Marcus to rejoin the other veterans, Emma to the small preparation room reserved for speakers and honorees. As the evening progressed and the ballroom filled with dignitaries, Emma watched from backstage. Congressional representatives mingled with military leadership. VA administrators networked with Veteran Service Organization directors. The air hummed with conversation, punctuated by occasional laughter, the polite, measured social interaction of Washington's power circles. Then she spotted them, her veterans, seated at two tables near the middle of the room. Walter, his Vietnam cap firmly in place despite the formal setting. Tiffany, hair styled elegantly. Bella seated perfectly beside her chair. Even Amber had made the trip, looking nervous but proud in a borrowed cocktail dress. They seemed out of place among the Washington elite, yet utterly dignified in their authenticity. A coordinator with a clipboard appeared at Emma's elbow. "Ms. Sullivan, you're up after the Undersecretary's remarks." "About 10 minutes?" Emma nodded, smoothing her dress with suddenly damp palms. As she took a final glance at her note cards, a commotion near the entrance caught her attention. A woman was arguing with the event staff, her voice rising despite their attempts to calm her. With a jolt, Emma recognized Meredith Carter. The regional manager looked different than she had at the cafe, more polished in an expensive suit. Hair perfectly styled, but her expression held the same cold determination. Whatever had brought her to the conference, it wasn't celebration. Emma felt her stomach drop. After weeks of investigation, careful preparation, gathering veteran testimonials, would it all be derailed by a public confrontation? She scanned the room for security, for Colonel Harrison, for anyone who might intervene before Meredith could disrupt the proceedings. But before she could alert the coordinator, something unexpected happened. Marcus had noticed the disturbance and was making his way toward the entrance. Ranger keeping perfect pace, he approached Meredith with military bearing, spoke a few words Emma couldn't hear, then gestured toward a quiet corner away from the main proceedings. To Emma's surprise, Meredith followed, her posture stiff but compliant. Whatever Marcus had said had at least temporarily diffused the situation. The coordinator tapped Emma's shoulder. 2 minutes. Ms. Sullivan. On stage, Undersecretary Keller was concluding his remarks about the importance of public-private partnerships in veteran care. Emma took a deep breath, gathering her composure, trying to focus on her speech rather than the potential threat Meredith posed. "And now," Keller continued, "it is my distinct honor to present the National Civilian Commendation for Distinguished Service to Veterans to a woman whose innovative approach has changed how we think about veteran reintegration. Please join me in welcoming Emma Sullivan." Applause filled the ballroom as Emma walked onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. She shook Keller's hand, accepted the framed commendation with a gracious nod, then approached the podium. As the applause faded, she found herself staring out at a sea of expectant faces. Remember what Marcus said? She thought. Find them in the crowd. Her eyes sought out her veterans, finding Walter's weathered face, Tiffany's encouraging smile. The sight centered her, reminding her why she stood here. What was at stake beyond a personal honor? "Thank you, Undersecretary Keller, distinguished guests," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm not a general. I'm not a doctor. I didn't write policy. Until 6 months ago, I managed a cafe near a military base. I served coffee. I listened." She paused, letting the simplicity of the statement settle over the audience. "But in that space, I watched something sacred happen. Veterans came not for advice, but for presence. They didn't need to be fixed. They needed to be seen." As she spoke, weaving together the stories her veterans had shared without names, respecting their privacy, she noticed movement at the back of the room. Marcus had returned to his seat, but Meredith remained standing near the wall, watching intently, her expression unreadable. Emma continued, describing how the Veterans Wellness Center had evolved, how connection and community became the foundation for healing, how coffee and conversation could build bridges that formal therapy alone sometimes couldn't. "The truth is," she said, nearing her conclusion, "our approach isn't revolutionary. It's remembering something we've always known, but sometimes forget in our rush to systematize care. Human beings heal in community. Veterans are not problems to solve, but people to welcome home, fully home. Not just physically, but emotionally, socially, spiritually." The room had grown extraordinarily quiet. Hundreds of influential people leaning forward slightly, listening with unexpected attention to this cafe manager turned veterans advocate. "When I was fired for defending a veteran and his service dog," Emma continued, her voice softening, "I thought I'd lost everything. Instead, I found a new mission, one that honors my brother's memory and serves the men and women who put everything on the line for our country." She looked directly at her veterans now, speaking to them rather than the wider audience. "Thank you for trusting me with your stories, your pain, your healing. This commendation belongs to all of you." The applause that followed wasn't the polite, measured response of official Washington. It was genuine, heartfelt, building as people rose to their feet. Emma felt overwhelmed by the response, humbled by the standing ovation that spread across the ballroom like a wave. As she left the stage, Deputy Secretary Matthews intercepted her, clasping her hand warmly. "Perfectly said, Ms. Sullivan. Exactly what this crowd needed to hear." Emma thanked her, then scanned the room for Meredith, concerned about what might come next. To her surprise, the regional manager was gone from her observation post by the wall. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations. Business cards pressed into her hands, promises of follow-up conversations about expanding her approach to other VA facilities. Emma accepted it all graciously, but found the most comfort in the brief moment she spent at her veterans' tables, grounded by their familiar faces amid the Washington whirlwind. As the formal program concluded, and attendees began dispersing to various receptions and after-parties, Emma slipped away to the hotel's terrace for a moment of quiet. The Washington Monument glowed in the distance, a perfect spring evening settling over the Capitol. "Ms. Sullivan." She turned to find Meredith Carter standing a respectful distance away, her expression no longer hard but tentative, almost vulnerable. "Ms. Carter," Emma acknowledged cautiously. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I wasn't invited," Meredith admitted. "I came to... well, honestly, I'm not sure what I came to do." Emma waited, giving the other woman space to find her words. "That Marine, your friend, he told me about your brother," Meredith finally said, "about how he took his own life after coming home." Emma nodded, the familiar ache of Michael's absence momentarily sharpening. "My husband," Meredith continued, her voice wavering slightly, "was killed by a drunk driver 4 years ago, a veteran who'd been self-medicating with alcohol. I've been angry for a long time." Understanding dawned. "That's why you reported me to the VA." "Yes," Meredith admitted. I convinced myself you were enabling dangerous behavior, letting emotions override safety protocols. But watching you tonight, hearing those stories, she trailed off, composing herself. I was wrong. What you're doing, it matters. It might have mattered to the man who killed my husband if he'd had somewhere like your center to go instead of a bar. The admission hung between them, unexpected and transformative. Emma felt the weight of their shared losses, different yet connected by the same frayed edges of the veteran care system. I've withdrawn my complaint, Meredith said quietly. The investigation should be closed by the time you return to Fort Belvoir. Thank you, Emma said simply. Meredith nodded once, then turned to leave. At the terrace door, she paused. The cafe hasn't been the same without you. The veterans stopped coming. It's just coffee now. As Meredith disappeared back into the hotel, Emma remained on the terrace, watching the city lights shimmer against the night sky. 6 months ago, she'd stood outside Homecoming Cafe, newly unemployed, uncertain of her future. Now she stood in the nation's capital, recognized for work she'd never planned to do, reconciled with the woman who'd fired her. Life's strange circles, she thought, remembering something old Pete often said at the center. Ain't no straight lines in healing, just loops that bring you back to where you need to learn something. When she finally returned inside, she found her veterans waiting in the lobby, ready to escort her back to the modest hotel where they were all staying. Marcus and Ranger stood at attention, a formal honor guard of 2. Walter held out his arm like a gentleman from another era. Tiffany and Amber flanked them, tired but beaming with pride. Let's go home, Emma said, linking her arm through Walter's. Already there, darlin', the old veteran replied with a wink. Home ain't a place. It's these people right here. They walked out together into the Washington night, a small family forged in coffee and courage, carrying their hard-won wisdom back to the center that awaited their return. In the quiet moments of reflection, we often wonder if our small acts of kindness truly matter in this chaotic world. Emma Sullivan's story reminds us they do. Like many of you who served our nation or loved someone who did, Emma understood that healing doesn't always come from clinical protocols or government programs. It comes from being seen, from belonging, from a warm cup of coffee and an understanding nod across the table. When she stood up for Marcus and his loyal German shepherd, Ranger,